Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I am your host, JP John Paz. With me today, very special guest, former WCW commentator, announcer, backstage worker. He is now an artist, an author, a comedian, and even a clown. He's Mr. Chad Damiani. Chad, welcome to the two-man power trip. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. And so I have all those options, right? JP, John Paz, John or Paz. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I'm
Yes.
just kidding. Okay, JP, that's my old writing partner's name, so that rolls off the tongue.
Nice. All right. I like that. What's going on in your world? What are you up to?
Oh wow. I am now working exclusively as a clown, as you mentioned, which sounds so clownish to say. But I teach, I perform, I work on some TV shows, usually comedies, and it's usually a reflection of there's some clown element to the show. I work out of Vegas doing stuff for variety shows, most often for a company called Spiegelworld that does really huge Vegas attraction shows like Absinthe, Atomic Saloon, and OPM. Yeah, it's pretty unrecognizable even for me. I've made a lot of these changes only in the last couple of years, and I just turned 50 last year, so
Wow.
it's like a huge tectonic shift in my life at a very I wouldn't say middle age because I'm never going to see 100, but whatever 50 is.
Hey, you never know, right? You never know.
Oh my god, I know I don't want to die,
Yeah, but you
so
never know. You could live to 100. Hey,
I
you
could
don't
live
know the
to
future. Yeah, you don't know the future.
150. Let's go for it, JP. Let's keep moving. Who
Just great.
knows?
Just crazy to think it's like, okay, WCW, and now I'm a clown. Like, it's kind of a weird transition, no?
JP, the craziest part about it is in the current iteration of my life, there's so much wrestling DNA. That was kind of something I discovered only a few years back. I had gone on all these other, it's been 22 years since I worked in wrestling. I had a little stint where I was Raven's co host on Raven's podcast, which I don't even, what did he call his podcast? The
The
Raven
Raven
Effect.
effect.
And I did that for 3 years, and it was a nice little return. I had missed him. He's a friend of mine. So, but I barely count that because I don't know if you ever listened. He never wanted to talk about wrestling.
Yep.
He never wanted to talk about wrestling.
Which is weird. Yeah.
So weird. But I also kind of get it in the sense that he's a bit of a perfectionist. And I think the fact that he couldn't participate in it, if it was something he couldn't do and try to like exhibit like his qualifications, then talking about it, I think frustrated him. But yeah, this clown work I do now, the type of clown I do in Los Angeles, very much I play a villain all the time. I play like a mean director. I roast people, I push them. When I talk to them before the shows about the psychology of the show, I use carny jargon and talk about how they have to sort of put me over and keep me strong through the whole show, because if people don't think I'm a threat, then they're not the underdogs. And it was just, I think this thing happens if you're lucky in life, that if you go a lot of different directions and different paths, that you find out everything you did had value for the point you're at right now.
Interesting. Now, you almost sound like a wrestling heel, so to speak, in certain aspects. Saying, you better put me over. I'm not the underdog. You're the underdog. It sounds like a wrestling heel.
Oh, 100%. The thing I realized, I mean, I always kind of knew this stuff, I guess, but if you think about vintage Ric Flair or vintage Roddy Piper, like when they were at their very best, yeah, we hated them, but we would have been lost without them, right? Like
Yeah.
we loved them on the shows. We needed their presence there, and we also on some level very much appreciated the entertainment value. And this is even before like the big global move by Vince to sort of destroy kayfabe publicly. We still sort of have this feeling. I think personally, MJF is right there right now. And Roman, in a lot of ways, I mean, Roman has become so cool. He's so cool. Like when I watch WWE programming and he's not on it, I do feel like I've been shorted the full experience of that
Yeah.
show.
Yep.
And so in Clown, what I do is I use this archetype that has existed for hundreds of years, which is something called a white clown or a clown boss. Like I play the power, the authority, and I direct clowns that are lower status or, underdog baby faces, whatever you want to call them. And the whole idea is to protect that structure of power, because as long as the audience thinks those clowns have to work super hard to sort of please me, but also to give the audience what they want, then the audience is enthralled. And if they push back too hard or destroy the construct of authority, sort of call me out or say, well, I'm not going to do what you want to do, the audience cools off because they no longer feel the peril of those clowns. Like they're not worried about them, so they don't feel like they have to take care and protect them, which I think a good audience does for a baby face. They don't only feel like they're cheering the baby face on, they feel like the baby face could not succeed without them.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Now, I'm thinking of clown, I'm thinking of evil clown, I'm thinking of like Doink the Clown.
Of course.
Is that
I don't
kind
blame
of
you. I mean, we have a real branding issue.
hmm,
But clown in its contemporary form, specifically in Los Angeles and Las Vegas, looks very different. Most of us don't wear red noses. We don't wear face paint. It's just more the idea of playing with an audience instead of for an audience, which I think is very wrestling. Yeah.
yeah. Yep.
This idea of like, this is not a presentational, this is immersive. We do really dumb shit, honestly. Like we do the silliest stuff, but we do it with an audience. Like we find games to play with the audience, which you can totally make the comparison to like Daniel Bryanson's Yes. That's a game you play with an audience. Woos when you chop someone. Like we do basically the same thing, except almost the entire act is that. The act is like finding ways to get the audience to play along with us and be silly with us. And I rarely like the only makeup I wear is like I'll paint black eyes on for a certain character. I have a character that I do at shows where I have a really bad sunburn. Like the joke is I'm like I use a lot of blood, but yeah, there's no like big shoes or flowers. Not for me, at least. That stuff still exists, but that's just kind of not what we're doing in Los Angeles.
Almost Rock Hogan-esque where it's like, "Yay, boo.
Yeah,
Yay, boo." Yeah, right? Like that kinda
audience
thing.
loves it,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
they love to sing along with Jericho when he walks out. Like the idea of like, how can you create something simple enough that the audience immediately can jump on board and feel like they can play with you and play along? And that's kind of why the work we do is so dumb, because if it was more complex, then the audience would have to, unpack it and figure out their part in it. We need it to be almost like a child can do. Let's be honest. I mean, what makes wrestling so amazing, why I'm still a fan, at 50, is because there is just a stark simplicity. It's, you know what I mean? Like, and again, simple isn't a dirty word. Football is simple. Golf is simple. It's like, oh, I know what's going on here, so I can invest fully emotionally into it. And I don't have to figure out a bunch of shit. Whereas maybe a movie, it like revels in its complexity or getting the audience to really have to think through the plot and the narrative. Wrestling is at its best when something like Jey Uso rolling out of the ring, we know exactly what it means.
Yep.
Like we understand completely what this gesture means because the story is being told so cleanly.
And even the Owens laying there, he's got the handcuffs on. Roman's pushing Sammy, saying, "Hit your friend, hit your friend." He turns his back and he gets hit with a chair. It's like, oh shit, shots fired. Oh
Yeah.
shit. Yeah. Very
My
simple but
favorite,
perfect.
and it's fun because I don't get to talk wrestling too much, and I love it. But the moment where Usi was born, and there's a moment where Sammy is trying to reason with Roman, and he's like, no, he's reasoning with Jay. I'm sorry, and he's like, I'm just doing what the tribal chief wants. I'm just doing what the tribal chief wants. And then Jay goes, I don't give a damn what the tribal chief wants. It's like one of the best clips. I get goosebumps thinking about it because
Yeah.
all Roman does is look straight. It's such a clown moment. He looks straight into the camera, right? All he does is lift his chin up, and that reaction of him just looking into the camera, essentially looking at us.
Yes. Yep.
I mean, that is the dream in my new career too, that the simplest gesture can, elicit the hugest response. I mean, I got to tell you, that's right now, that's like circling a top 5 storyline for nuance and drama. And I just feel like it's but what makes it so good is, yes, it's simple, but also you have a bunch of characters that have depth within the storyline. But yeah, like this is all stuff that I talk to my students about. I do a show called Stand Up and Clown, which I just did last night. And I'm lucky. It's like a sold out show, and I get a lot of really cool, famous comics to do it. And the idea is I put them through a gauntlet of clown work. Like I put them on and make them do physical bits without talking, and I direct them. And I've had Reggie Watts, I had Rory Scovel. Like I've had a lot of people who like have followings as comics, and when I talk about this show with them, like for me, I feel like I'm laying out a match. I'm like I tell them, hey, listen, first I come out and I cut a promo for like almost 10 minutes just about how hard I'm going to be on them and how stand up is bullshit. I don't believe any of it. It's all just to get the audience to be shocked that I'm being so evocative and like saying things about these people who are right in front of me, just like I'm fearless. And I always tell them when they get on stage for the first time, I'm going to roast you and you're going to want to come back at me. But the best thing you can do is just take it. Just stand there and take it. Don't be withered. Don't be broken, but just let the audience root for you to get it right. Because if you're too strong too early, again, the audience feels they're good. I don't need to take care of them. And what do you have then? Then you have to, deliver to such a high level. But if they're rooting for you, they're going to also be moved when you fail. I also, JP, use the one guy gets over, one guy goes over. That old phrase. I use it all the time. And I'm like, I'm going over. Like this is my show. It happens every month. I'm going to be the one ultimately who seemingly has won the day, but they're going to love you. They're going to leave here having been thoroughly entertained by you and just feel like they know you better and they're closer to you. I always watch very closely, like the talents like Sammy and like Jungle Boy and like people where I'm like, or Darby's a really good example, Darby Allin. I'm like, yeah, they've got it down. They don't have to win. They just have to try so hard. They just have to give their all, and the audience is going to just stay with them until it's time. It's until it's time for them to have that sweet moment, and you can wring that out for years.
So true. And that's a great thing because it's like I'm going over, but you're gonna get over while I'm going over. So that's great, especially when it's like that underdog babyface. Daniel Bryan's a great example a few years ago. Remember and I don't even know if they did this on purpose, but he kept losing,
Oh
losing,
yeah.
losing, and he was getting he was really getting over, getting over. Orton kept going over and Bryan kept getting over. So it was, I don't know, maybe if they did do it on purpose, who knows? But it's one of those things where it worked
I
out
don't
perfectly for
know.
Daniel.
I
They
mean, I
probably
would
didn't
love
do
to
it on
think,
purpose, but
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I'd love to think they were. But in fact, I think what Daniel Bryan did in that instance too is they he was losing, but they couldn't beat him. Like that's
Mhm.
like that quality that you look for. And eventually then, and this is true in clown too, ultimately the audience in a perfect world, like the audience is the arbiter of who eventually gets success. But haven't you noticed too, sometimes when you have that like white meat underdog babyface guy, and then eventually you give the fans what they want, they cool off. Sometimes you can carry it, but often the audience is like so trained to root for them. They're the Cubs, and like you give that, like when Kofi got the belt, obviously 50% of this is just terrible booking, because Kofi's super charismatic, but also you have to transition that audience into having a different relationship because now that underdog is on top. It's essentially a new character. And there have been instances where that's been done really well, but most of the time, and it's amazing to me because I mean, these are very smart people in terms of like wrestling psychology. It's essentially like, that thing you love to do with this character, that doesn't happen anymore. Now they're doing great. So have a different relationship with this character. We're not going to help you get there. And so it feels like they're just cooling off, but it's like, no, that's a mistake in the booking. The
Yep.
booking has to find a way to give the audience the same sensation that they have to protect their hero.
Yep. That was like in '98. I could think of them. That's when they actually did it perfectly. Because like, wow, Austin did it. He's finally a champion. And then they put 1,000 obstacles. The boss
Yeah,
hates him. All the boss's cronies are against him. He's got a guy, and like Dude Love when they first started out. It's like, okay, this guy came out of nowhere. He's known the guy forever. He thought he's his friend. He turns on him, and then Vince is the referee in one match. It's like that's what you got to do with the
100%.
Bayface. They did nothing with Kofi. They was horrible booking with him. Even when Daniel Bryan, I know they had him against Kane when and then obviously he got hurt and that kind of ruined things. But it was almost like they needed to put, I don't know, bigger obstacles against these guys, like they did in '98. Like they knew how to do it then. They haven't done it good since.
That was so flawless. You're so right. It's such a great example of, oh, you got what you wanted. Now it's worse. Like that's
Yeah,
what needs to happen. They want, there's a masochism, a sadism, like we need to feel like we have to continue to protect our boy. Another great example, I think, of another way you play it is just how well Dusty was booked all through the time. Like, yeah, they'd let him get the belt. How long did he hold a belt? Two
like 30
months,
days or
30
less.
days.
Yeah, yeah. It was very short reigns. Yeah,
And
those few
again,
times
yeah,
that he beat Flair was like, boom, he's not even
he
champ
just,
anymore. Yeah,
and like you might look back and it's like, yeah, because Dusty gets it. Dusty gets that what we cheer for is he's us, and and we're on the chase with him. Not that he's better than us, like not that he's the very thing we've been booing, which is the authority, the power. Um, yeah, it's just wild to me when I see in wrestling, and again, we should be fair because what every company now, like AEW, WWE, even Impact, they're booking so much wrestling, so many stories. It is hard to sort of track and be prepared for all the eventualities of like when you sort of pay off storylines. But I'm still shocked when they're like, they didn't know this was going to happen. They didn't know that giving them what they've been chasing changes the entire story and the entire relationship, and that they needed to almost look at it like, okay, this character has won the level of a video game, and now they're in a new level, and this level is twice as ruthless. Their chances of survival is even worse. Not even just that it's hard, but like now that they have this thing, and you see it sometimes, like with someone like Braun, like, and I don't watch a ton of NXT, but like they'll make a gesture which is 12 guys come out and they all want Braun, but they're really not. We don't think any of those guys are going to win. Like
right,
the
right.
gesture's there, but you have to. Oh, that's an interesting. Talking about Braun Breaker, like obviously, what a talent! Like what a gift! Like this guy's so athletic, he carries himself like a star. But it's so interesting, like how, like for me, I look at that and I go, this guy's getting over despite everything they're doing because they've made him so genial. You know what I mean? Like, he goes fishing with Apollo Creed. He, like they're trying so hard to make him into that kind of baby face that's the best guy.
Yeah,
And that's the guy who never gets laid. I mean that in the metaphorical sense, right? He's like the friend box guy. I'm like, no, what we like about Braun is he's
yeah.
a
His girlfriend
badass
in
and
real life is gorgeous. He's a
yeah,
badass. Yeah,
he's a
yeah,
bad, like he's just
yeah.
got it all. Like, I would put Braun in the category like with The Rock, like this guy's just got it going on and we get it. He's the
Or like
alpha
his uncle,
male.
Big
Yeah.
Papa Pump. Yeah,
Oh yeah. I mean, that's another great example and close to form. It's like making him like, I get it. He's very like reasonable and like they're trying to play like, oh, but he's got a temper. And it's like, no, just let him be a young, brash. He's Tom Cruise in Top Gun. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yep.
yeah, he's got his problems, but we love the fact that he's the best and he knows it. Like you have to understand, and this is again back to the work I do now. You have to understand what the audience thinks the relationship is. Like what their relationship is with the talent. And you can't just be like, oh, but now, he's just more reasonable and he's sweet and he's just a regular blue collar guy. No, he's not. He's an athletic phenom, like you said, who comes from a family of killers who believes
Yeah,
that
his
no one can
dad is
touch
actually
him.
yeah, his dad actually might be tougher than Big Papa Pump, which actually probably is, but yeah.
Yeah, there was a story that used to go around, and I say story, with air quotes because again, you're filming this and I'm not doing air quotes, but let's pretend I'm doing air
Yes,
quotes.
yes.
But there was a story that the Steiner brothers, I won't say the promoter's name, but there was a promoter that they were frustrated with. I couldn't even tell you why, but these two bulls supposedly stripped him naked, hogtied him. They put him on a bench, like when you're in a parochial school gym, like those benches where you
Yeah.
sit. They put him on this bench, and they put a pencil point first into his asshole,
Oh
so
my
that if he rolled over, it would push the pencil. Like if he tried to sit up, like this is the lineage of Braun Breaker. Do you know what I mean? Like just a different type of man, like a different species of mankind, And I get the idea that, a writer's room can sit around and say, like, but what if we do this? What if we do that? But like a writer's room should read the room. Do you know? Like they should be watching the reaction and they should be
Yep.
watching what the talent is doing and what's authentic to the talent. And they build off that. They don't just go, he's a golfer. Like they have to build off what's there because the audience responds mostly to authenticity.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
we've seen it. JP, we've seen it for decades and decades. And still once in a while you see what I call like a stray idea of just like someone had a good idea that has nothing to do with this wrestler. Maybe it's good for someone else, but like a wrestler just can't make an idea work because a writer wants or a booker wants them to. Like the audience decides if the idea reflects how they feel about the talent.
Right. Definitely. And Steiner Brothers, oh my God, I think I could do a complete show about all the pranks that they've done to people. And some of them, I guess, are vicious or quote unquote would be vicious. I think they're hilarious. Like shooting somebody with a gun, but the gun was blank. And the person thought
Yeah.
that he killed them. Like
Different
Rick, you
time, man.
killed me.
Right?
Yeah, completely different time. Oh my God. And like them pulling pranks on like Ludwig Borga, who's like a known not a guy to be messed with. Like they're pranking him. They're pranking Butch Reed, who's another guy
I
not to
know.
be messed with. Like I mean, they're like nuts. Supposedly they wouldn't mess with like Ron Simmons and Haku, which is probably smart. But everybody else was like fair game. They'll go after anybody.
When in the prime of Big Papa Pump in WCW, we were somewhere like Sacramento Arena. It might not have been, but what I mean is it was a new, pretty nice arena. And Scott comes to catering and he's got a tank top on. And I'm kind of watching him walk in. And then I can see people's heads turning. And he goes right up to the line to eat. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, I just feel the energy change. He's just has a tank top on, no underwear, no pants. His dick and balls are hanging out. You see his butt. And he just goes and gets food and walks back to the locker room. I mean, that was just like, no one's going to say a goddamn thing to
Yeah,
him.
no, hell no.
But yeah, that's who these guys are, and you're right. It is like this thing where a product of the time, right? Like,
Yeah, of course.
yeah, it is like, cause there's a lot of stuff I remember from back then because it was such a wild time to be in wrestling because we had, new TV money, but old TV thinking. You had a bunch of people from the regional days. They were running things and people
Yep.
who had sort of cut their teeth then. And it's just so much more rugged. That's a kind word. In the regional days and like this cross between like big time executives from Turner, in suits walking around, and these guys were like felons and, they really beat up people in the ring. And, if a fan, jumped the rail, just beat the shit out of like that culture still existing while the corporate culture was kind of starting to press in on it all. I think sometimes, I mean, I would never take away the time I worked in wrestling. I mean, working at WCW during the NWO angle, it's like the most historic angle I think that'll ever be. But sometimes I look at AEW and I bet it's more fun now. Most of these guys are video game nerds now. Like
Yeah.
they're the product of the globalization of wrestling. Like they don't have this sort of, they didn't go into a wrestling school and no one told them it wasn't real and just had to get their asses kicked for like 6 months for whatever reason. And I'm like, oh, I bet like there's just a better, because I had a great time and people treated me very well. Um, but I did feel like a stranger in a strange land. You know, I was a regular guy amongst people living a real hardcore carny circus life. And so like that's why I really don't have a ton of people, you know, I haven't talked to him in years, but I would consider DDP someone I could call. Like if I was like, oh, if I wanted to call DDP, I could have a conversation with him, and he was always really nice. Raven and I threatened to talk a ton. Like we text a lot, but like he's a little difficult too. Like he's a bit of a he's one of those guys that has such a set schedule. And like it's like if you don't find that 15 minutes that he's not doing whatever he does every day. But yeah, like I just left wrestling not feeling like I had a ton in common with these guys. And now I think if I worked there, I probably would just feel we had similar upbringings. We came up very more similarly, you know, and that we could be better friends and stuff like that.
When you look at it, though, going back to WCW, how the heck did you get in there to begin with? How did you get in? How'd you break into WCW?
Well, that's the kind of funny thing. And you've picked a really, I don't know if you, I didn't realize this myself. I guess today is the anniversary, date wise, of when I got my job. Because,
Wow. Weird.
yeah, it's so crazy. And it might be yesterday, but I think it's today. I saw a post on Twitter about Boston Brawl, which was the pay per listen event that
Yeah.
WCW.com. That
Yeah.
was how I got my job. I was, uh, you know, someone who I was in Atlanta years earlier, met some people. I was working on a different project, met some people who were running the website, went to New York to be like a starving. I went to New York to be a successful artist, ended up being a starving artist. No one goes there to be starving. And those guys were really kind to me, the WCW.com guys, and they let me review like Nitro and they would pay me for stuff for their website. And then they saw an opportunity when the NWO hotline started, because a lot of times these guys wouldn't record their message and there had to be a new message every day. They kind of connected me with the right people because I was an actor. And I became this personality on the NWO hotline. I was only supposed to record the rare message when one of these guys forgot. But of course, these guys just stopped recording messages. So I'd record several messages a week for the NWO hotline merely as like a legal buffer so that when people called 2 days in a row, they wouldn't hear the same message and could request their money back.
Right. Right.
And again, it's the hotline. It's so peripheral. Like this is just, you know, part of the money-making machine. It's not part of the storytelling, anything. But because of that, because I had to check it. So what would happen is I would check at midnight to see if Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan, Hall and Nash, I forget, there was a fifth, there was 7 people. I would check to see if they recorded a 10-minute message. They almost never did. And then I'd record a message if just to have a backup. And at 7 a.m. the next morning, someone in Smyrna would listen to my message to make sure I did my job. And we would do, speaking of JP, I was working with this guy named JP, not working with him yet, actually. We were just 2 actors. Later, we would do a bunch of screenwriting together. We would just do silly messages because we didn't know anything. We didn't have any information. So we just parody the product. And, you know, I figured it was just going to come to an end because, you know, it was getting like $150 in 1996 to do this, which is crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like
It's awesome.
just
Yeah.
10 minutes, you know, and it was great for me. Like that was more than I could make 3 days working like a minimum wage job. And people thought the messages were funny, you know, so they'd listen and drink their coffee in the morning and a bunch of people would get together in a boardroom down in Smyrna and listen to me just make fun of the product, right? Had no idea.
Yeah.
By the way, I have no idea any of this is happening. They decide to do Boston Brawl. They're given a shoestring budget. They have enough money to fly in a sound tech who's unfortunately passed away during COVID and was a friend of mine for many years. They could fly in Mark Madden, who was like just kind of starting out and cutting his teeth because the NWO was kind of developing their own announcers, and Mean Gene Okerlund. They didn't have money to put a crew together, so they offered me like nothing to take a train from New York to Boston, and I would just be a grip. I just run cable to the ring. I was like, oh my God, of course. And then get to meet wrestlers. Like,
Yeah, it's awesome.
I thought it would be fucking great. I was 25 years old. And I get there. I'm just running cable, doing my job, keeping my head down, peeking up, seeing like people in catering, like not even bothering to talk to anyone because I was kind of like just a little starstruck. And this guy named Tom Hunt came over to me, and he's one of the big wig execs. And he's like, Gene Okerlund got food poisoning. I even remember, JP, they were like, he ate a bad chicken focaccia sandwich at the Marriott. I remember, like, because it was such a
Wow.
slow motion moment. Do you
Yeah,
ever have
wow.
those where you're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I remember everything.
Yep.
And I'm literally doing that thing where you wrap cable around your hand and your elbow. You know what I'm talking
Yep.
about?
Oh yeah. Yep.
And
Yep.
I'm like, oh man, that's rough for you guys. And then he's just staring at me. I'm like, what? He goes, you're the closest thing we have to a commentator because you do the hotline. And like, it's not registering.
Yeah.
I am not a commentator. Wasn't at that time. I don't know what I'm doing. I never took communication classes or anything. And he goes, you have to do it. Like, so surreal, even thinking about it now. And within like 5 minutes, and by the way, just to be clear, I'm dressed like dog shit. Like, I remember I had on like a great, do you remember those Chimay flannels? Like
Oh
those big
God.
Chimay
Yeah.
flannels? I have that
Yeah.
on. I have jean shorts, construction boots. Like, I'm dressed like a college kid. And I'm walking down the aisle at the Boston Garden. It's sold out. Walking to the commentating table, which is right next to the ring. And there's just like people everywhere. And I sit next to Mark Madden, and he's like, who the fuck are you? Like, legitimately. And I was like, I'm a commentator. Like, I mean, I couldn't even speak. And within seconds, because this is all happening so fast, I put my headset on and I hear them going, here we go. Like it was like a dream. And the show starts. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know really what the matches are. Like, I kind of knew, but I wasn't really paying attention like a commentator. And I try to do the job. I don't know what to say. And Mark, whom I like, but let's be honest. I mean, he's an asshole. I mean, I like him. I worked with him for many years, but I mean, that's his whole fucking thing.
Right.
He just kind of runs me over, rightfully so, by the way, because I didn't know what I was doing. And I'm like, in my head, I'm just sitting there and listening to him just talk, and like he's not leaving me any room. And I'm just like, it's all over. I had this great hotline job. If I hadn't come up here, I'd still be making all that money. And instead, I came up here, and now I'm just going to ruin this broadcast. And I don't know who he was fighting, but Greg the Hammer Valentine was in the first match. And even at this point, Greg's kind of an older guy,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I remember he had a claw hammer on the back of his tights, like right across his ass crack. And I don't know what it was, but I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to do what I do with my friends. Like, all we would do watching wrestling was make fun of it. And so I start talking about, like, why does he have a hammer on his ass? That's the first thing. And Madden's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, what does he think that means? I was like, what do you think when he had that done? Like, he's like, hey, I want to scare people. I'm going to put this hammer on my ass. I was like, because I know parts of New York, specifically Chelsea, New York, that if you walked around in tights with a hammer on your ass, you were definitely asking for something other than a fight. And Madden
Right.
starts laughing, right? But he's also like, I don't know what this guy's doing, like, other than getting his ass fired and like just saying stuff like that. What I don't know is at this time, Hall and Nash, who aren't going to be in the show until the very end, they're only there to run in after the main. There's a cage match at the end. They're going to run in at the end, kind of like that schmaz they did over and over.
Yep.
So they're bored. They're just back there for hours, and they're listening to this broadcast, and they hear me just making fun of the product, and they think it's funny. And so all of a sudden, they both have very distinct voices. I hear their voices in my headset. They're watching the monitor, and they come in and they start making jokes about Greg the Hammer Valentine. It's like the most surreal thing you can imagine. And then we spend the rest of the show, this 2.5 hour show, the four of us just making fun of the product. And I'm just like, this is insane. Um, I think the match was like it was like an early giveaway because it was pay per listen. I think it was Sting Hogan. Like it was a
Yeah.
huge cage match.
Yeah. Yep.
And again, I don't even remember how that match ended, other than the outsiders come in eventually and like just beat the tar out of everybody. And they're getting pelted with trash and beers and like curly fries and cups. And I can remember Nash at one point, like this is a very visual memory. Like he reached through the cage and put a curly fry in my mouth. Like I'm the king of the world at this point. Like, right? Like as a
Yeah.
wrestling
Holy
mark,
shit.
right?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, I leave there. I'm just like, well, that was a fun adventure. Like, okay, I lost a really good job, but what a story I have for the rest of my life. Because, right, like, there's no way that's what they wanted to happen. That's what I'm
Right.
thinking.
Yeah. Definitely not. Yeah.
And this part, I can't say it's true. Or this is what I was told because I wasn't there. But I guess Hall and Nash called Eric Bischoff and they were like, there's this kid. And we were, he did Boston Brawl. And like, that's what we want to do. Like, all he does is make fun of the product and he's totally irreverent. And at the time, just like this is one of those things in life, they were kind of expanding the roster because they were doing that split branding idea where NWO could have its own show
Yep. And Thunder was coming. Yep.
and they were bringing on people. They were bringing on I forget his name, Ross. There was a guy named Ross, and I think Jeremy Borash wasn't far behind me. A guy named Jeff Katz.
Ross
They were just
Foreman. Yeah.
they were bringing Ross Foreman, right? Oh God, I knew him so well, but it's been so many years I haven't spoken to him. I think Bob Ryder was close to getting his deal. He was going to help with that sort of the sense of like dirt sheet style. And so there was a deal in place for new talent, like at this very low level. And I get a call and I end up talking to this guy named Jay Hossman. And I tell my dad, like, what should I do? And my dad and I came up with a number and he offered me twice the number and said, I'm not negotiating. I'm like, brother, neither am I.
Yep.
Yeah. And then this is all happens within a matter of months after this Boston Brawl. And I'm now a full-time employee for the company.
That's a awesome like journey to WCW. I mean, the number one company at that point. So it's like, holy crap.
I mean, just like, sometimes I've gone on and done many things and I've like worked as a professional screenwriter and like right now I'm doing this clown stuff and like there's sometimes in life you feel like you're not getting any breaks. And I often like joke with myself. I'm like, cause you used them all up, you dipshit. You used them up one night. You had everything go right for you and landed like a dream job you didn't deserve in a company at the hottest point in its entire run. I was like, that's all your luck for life. And I felt that way. And I jumped the line on a lot of people who had been commentating on the indies and like, you know what I mean? Like I was I don't know if I'm grateful now. I don't know if then I realized just how impossible it all was. It just felt really cool. And, yeah. And then I just, for 5 years this was my full-time thing.
So what was like your technical like job responsibilities? What did you do? WCW Live? Like what else?
Well, WCW Live, I would just kind of be a guest on it. Like that was Jeremy and Bob. They ran it. I did all the internet broadcasts, and the internet broadcasts were kind of designed, one, to kind of test the technology, hoping to monetize it in the future, but also for international, like TV deals are so much more advanced now. Back then, there would be a lot of markets that we would want to visit that didn't have TV. So they could listen to these broadcasts and keep up with the product. That was the main thing. I also wrote for the magazine. I wrote for the website. I'd help with the licensing. Sometimes toys needed copy written. I help with the magazine, whatever they wanted. It was just my full-time job to kind of create content and announce. And it was great. I loved all of it. I mean, I say I loved all of it. I loved all of it for 3 years. And then when sort of the, rotating Game of Thrones Booker situation began, like when we started losing, it was still pretty fun, but the product wasn't very good. And it just felt like you couldn't get any momentum and you just felt the desperation of people backstage. It became so cutthroat. I mean, I always stayed out of it. I had no aspirations to take Tony Schiavone's job. I knew that wasn't possible. I wasn't ready either. He's a much better announcer than I am. But like you're watching everyone around you just constantly cutting out everyone else's legs and just being so vile. It was just like I mean, that is the thing. Like in the best of days, that carnival culture, it's a family. And in the worst of days, it's a gaggle of felons, you know,
Mm,
just
yep.
like the worst people doing the very worst, desperate for power and stuff. And so I really did sour on it. By the end, I was ready to go.
Give me an example of some backstage politics going on at that point. I mean, obviously, there's a ton of it, but just give me a small example of maybe some backstage politics that was going on.
What would happen a lot, again, like I said, it was this weird mash of regional wrestling, circus culture, and corporate culture. And we got to a point where, when Eric was kind of being ousted out, that you'd find people who worked for, the Atlanta Braves would have like a powerful position in the company. And especially, and I don't mind naming names. I mean, who cares? It's like, but the JJ Dillons, the Kevin Sullivans, the Kevin Nash, I mean, the minute there looked like there was some shift, I mean, they were on top of these people would come in, they didn't have a chance. I mean, they're dealing with these super charismatic, charming people, immediately filling their heads with who's good and who's bad and what needs to happen, and worming their way into like positions of power. And this was happening on a monthly basis. Also, there was like a lot of fuckery when it came to finishes and stuff like that. Like I don't remember who the wrestler was, but there was one incident where right before a match, a guy ran up to his opponent and told them that the road agent, this is a TV match, that had changed the finish, and they were going to essentially hit their finisher, and then like it was just some fuckery, like it was going to be a roll up, but I'm going to half kick out of it, and like kind of like a finisher killing, run. When that happens, like, oh, you're going to hit your finisher, but you're going to have to roll me up, and I'm almost going to get out, like.
Yeah.
That thing, the go over, get over stuff. It's like, oh yeah, but essentially that I'm going to come out looking better than you because I'm so tough that your finisher barely affected me.
Yep.
And
Kill
then
the finish.
afterwards, it was all a lie. This person was just on a no-cut contract. There was nothing that you could do to them. And they had just kind of screwed over, like, I mean, this is breaking like now the cardinal rule of like taking care of each other in the ring kind of stuff. Like, there was no Vince, I mean, and in some ways, thank fucking God, there was no
Right.
like monster, but there was no like real authority, and you could kind of get away with stuff. And like that kind of shit was happening all the time, and it was, it's like in that way, like exciting. Like, I guess watching Real Housewives is exciting, but like, this was my life. These were my coworkers. And it's like, oh yeah, you can't trust anyone. Everyone's awful. Like no one has any respect for anybody. And then when you put that also into the equation of these shows fucking suck. Like we are changing gimmicks weekly. It was surreal. Like I remember sometimes like I would look at a lineup and I'm like, what? Who's this guy? And they're like, that's Booker T. He's GI Bro now. I'm like, what? I was like, when did that? It happened Wednesday. It happened on Thunder. I was like, what? I was like, God, I usually watch like that kind of stuff where you felt like you barely keep up with things because the shifts were tectonic and they were happening constantly.
Yeah, you had the Bischoff era, which was obviously highly successful, but then when it starts to go downhill, he's gone. Then they bring in Russo. I mean, it was pretty crazy.
And
And
don't
then
forget, there's
Russo's
also
gone. Yeah.
Sullivan, and then there was Kevin Nash had the pencil
Yep.
for a little
Yep.
bit. Like there was so much, and like when a corporate guy would end up like with more power, he would always have to find like an advocate wrestler to kind of, because they didn't know what the fuck they were doing.
Right.
And so it would always be the worst one. Like it would always be someone who was just like maniac, like someone who, the regional guys, I will say, they had a ruthlessness to them. Like if they got control, like literally the next night, the people they didn't like were like, jobbing out to children, like it was like, wow, you guys are tough. Like you guys don't, it feels a lot. I don't want to get political, but like kind of, when you talk about like hardcore right-wing politics, the way they like just turn on each other, you know what I mean? Like just ruthless, like
Yeah.
with no thought of the future. Like it was that kind of shift in booking where it's like, oh, this guy was on a good push and everyone was behind it. And now he's just losing every night. Like you didn't even like build a new story for him. You're just like literally punishing this person on air for us to watch. And, like, I don't know. I'll never, again, being older now, like, I almost wish I just left. Like, cause it's like, you just can't be around that kind of toxicity, especially when you can't fix it. Like, you just, yeah. I mean, I'm glad I stayed to the end, and what a story to sort of be fired on air by Vince, like that's really cool.
You're right.
But yeah, like, to have something you love so much turn into something where you're dreading flying to Tampa to be watch a wrestling show. I mean, that's ridiculous. Like, that should be the best fucking day of your life. Like, and it started to be like you try to talk your way out of going places. Before it was just the best time ever, because you just didn't want to even be part of it.
A lot of crazy politics in WCW. And remember, Scott Hall was dating Brad Siegel's niece at one point. I mean, there was like
Sure.
crazy ass politics going
I
on
worked
there.
with
Yeah.
her a lot too. Like, she was in the office. And I can remember too, one time a couple years after, like, I think she was just so desperate. She reached out and she's like, do you know where Scott is? I'm like, lady, I haven't worked in this. Like, I am like, no, I have no connection to any of this. I was like, how many people has this woman texted today? Like, I have to be 200th on this list. And like, there was so much. And there was like there was a lot of that. There was a lot of like flings and relationships. And for the sake of people's marriages and their reputations, I won't go into names, but like,
Right.
women in the office having relationships with men in the ring. Not rarely men in the office having sex with women in the ring. That didn't happen. But there was so much of that. It's just like there was no one to kind of oversee it or kind of create a standard. Like, no one was answerable to anyone. Like, even I could tell you this, like, this is how, like, you could do stuff like this back then. You could call travel, tell them you weren't needed for a show anymore. Call them back the next day and say they changed their mind. And then they would have to book you a full fare ticket to go to the same place. And then you could go to the airport and maybe pay $25 and be first class because it's a full fare ticket. Like, no one called you on that shit. Like, that was happening all the time. It was
Wow.
just like a money pit. Yeah, it was just, and by the way, like, I'm not going to say that there weren't times where I took advantage of this chaos. You know what I mean? Like things like that, or just upgrading a rental car for no reason. Knowing that like travel was so overwhelmed, they wouldn't even be able to figure out why. They would assume I was probably driving around a bunch of like, people from, what was that thing Mike Sanders ran? Remember when all those young guys came in?
The Natural Born Thrillers.
The Natural Born Thrillers. Yeah, like they would just assume I probably needed to, but I was like, oh, I know, I just want to drive a Mercedes this weekend.
Right. Yeah. Oh,
You know,
shit. Yeah.
there were like $5,000 bar tabs that someone like Alan Sharp from PR would just pick up, and and then again, once in a while, someone would come in and try to get really strict with that stuff, and then everyone would scramble. But then that person would eventually be ousted, and it would start all over again.
What about Bischoff? Was he just like the fun boss? What was going on with Eric?
Man, I was so low on the totem pole. Like, I never had a problem with Eric. He was always nice to me. I felt like he was like, but I also didn't matter. Like,
Yep.
So he certainly wasn't someone who walked around, and I saw him a bunch of times after, when I had a new career. I worked in reality TV for a while and then scripted, and I would see him in rare, like, I worked for Ryan Seacrest for a minute, and he came in with Hulk, and he was always nice. So I really can't speak to like the backstage machinations. I will say now, I mean, he is a true carny in the sense that like he's really good at just respinning history in his favor and finding ways to sort of insert himself into the current conversation. Like, Eric has said everything he can possibly say about his time in wrestling when he was relevant. And yet, but there's still money to be made. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like now, like the last few years, and again, I have nothing against the guy, but I look at some of that stuff and I'm like, yeah, I get it, man. Like, you want the checks to keep coming in, but boy, like, when I heard that, I think Guy Evans is the guy who wrote the Nitro book. When I heard he was writing the book through Eric's point of view, I was like, oh, Guy, oh my guy. I was like, you're getting worked hardcore. Like, if you think this guy really wants this honest portrayal, he found the guy who told the best and most honest version of what happened in WCW, and then paired with him to tell his version. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
and it's like, hey, if both of those guys make money, good for them. Because really, at the end of the day, who cares? I mean, this company's long dead and cold. But yeah, like the fact that he's still juicing the rind, and still finding ways to sort of insert himself. But you could say the same about Cornette. You could say the same about a lot of these guys. But yeah, it's amazing to me that people aren't shocked that these people are coming up with new stories. I was like, guess what? You can't sell old stories. Like
Yeah.
that tells you probably they're full of shit, you know? Um,
Nitro book, by the way, is awesome. Great book. I love because he interviews like 150
amazing.
guys. He's getting, he's getting guys. He didn't get Brad Siegel, and I couldn't get Brad Siegel either. He would only talk to us. This is obviously separate. Guy did this separately,
Sure.
and I did this separately. He would only say, "You can't record me, and I'll talk to you for 15 minutes, or whatever it is." He didn't want to talk about WCW that much either. So I was like, wow, I guess
Oh,
Brad
wow.
is not a big WCW fan. I guess.
Oh yeah, I think he looks at it as one of the great failures. And no, let me say that. And by the way, I haven't read. I don't know if it's come out yet. I know he's doing the second book with Eric.
Yeah, it came out. Yeah, it's pretty good
Okay.
actually.
Um, I'm sure it's entertaining. I'll tell you, the first book, I was really impressed with. There were still moments where you can tell that people were spinning the narrative in their favor, but
Yep.
in general, this book is a huge accomplishment.
Yeah.
An enormous. It is. I'm so glad it exists, and I know how hard Guy worked on this book and the hours and hours that he put into it. But like, it's insane how well and how close he is to the mark of what happened. Like, it's just he should get all the praise for that.
And I'll give Bischoff this credit. I mean, I love Eric anyway, but I mean, I'll give him credit on this. Has there been anybody else that ever beat a McMahon? Never. Even Vince Senior, you could say, was the best.
Yeah,
Nobody beat him. Only Bischoff.
I don't
And
dislike him. Yeah,
you
I
know,
guess for me, it's like it's the for me. How do I say this? I get a feeling sometimes, and I totally get it. Like because I'm someone who's been reinvented, maybe by choice, maybe by survival. JP, you can decide for yourself.
right,
But like, I'm a guy who like feels like a kind of like an upset stomach when I see like a picture of a wrestler in his 70s still in his makeup at a convention signing autographs. I'm like, oh God. I was like, I'm
right.
so sorry that whatever that the next stage of your life never happened. Yeah, I mean, I know that seems really cruel, but it's just like I want more from a guy in his middle age to be like, oh wow, you were enjoying like a splinter of what your life was. And that's why when I hear about these wrestlers that just kind of have moved on and opened car dealerships and like I'm like, good for you guys, because there's like as opposed to like holding on, and like
Yep,
there's just and now because my experience is 22 years ago, I just see more and more of that with people that I saw probably at the best moment of their lives.
yep,
And like, so probably if I seem like I have a lot of venom towards that, it's probably more sympathy and like, I really wish your like life kind of yielded new adventures so you didn't have to constantly relive the old ones.
yep. I gotcha. It is crazy to think like how great WCW was, and then it just completely goes downhill because,
So bad.
man, I mean, the NWO, obviously Hogan played a huge role. Obviously, he changed the business again. I mean, WWF was, and people say, oh, it was okay. It sucked like in those
It
mid
did.
'90s, like it was killing the business. And I know Hogan had the Dungeon of Doom stuff, and that's kind of lame, but you still had the Horsemen, you still had Sting, you still had the cruiserweight guys and stuff. So, or coming in anyway. Benoit and Eddie start coming in, but then it's like, holy shit, you hear wrestling's going down. Hogan NWO happens, it goes right back up, and then Austin takes it to another level. So it's like, man, they WWE saved the business and then fucking fell down a cliff. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it really is kind of like a rocket that just shot up into the stratosphere, ran out of fuel, and then just literally dropped faster than it flew for upward. Like I watched, I think it was called New Blood or Bad Blood, the NWO pay per view, the one that Russo booked,
Oh, New Blood Rising.
New Blood Rising. And let me tell you how bad things were. I was watching it with some friends out here. So I have some younger friends. A lot of comedy people love wrestling. Um, and I'm watching this thing. I commentated this whole. I didn't remember one moment. Like that's
Wow.
the dissonance. Like it got so bad and so much like you were just kind of surviving. I was like, I don't remember a single moment of calling these matches. And in the early days, I have a lot of fond memories. Like when the stories were cohesive and things were good. And then there's like years, like almost a year and a half, where I almost remember nothing. Like I could watch all those shows again and it would be like with fresh eyes because I was just cashing a check, and
Right.
just kind of miserable.
So, what did you think about that show? Just absolutely terrible.
I mean, in some ways, it's like a masterpiece of terrible. Like I think it could be like shown at midnight, you know, like
Yeah.
Rocky Horror. And yeah, because it's like also like all this. Not only are all the gimmicks bad, and you can just feel the lack of inspiration within the performers because they don't know what's going on. But then like it's also wildly convoluted. Like it's everything. It's everything. It's like when you watch The Room or something and you're like, "Oh, they did it all wrong." They
Yeah.
somehow
Yeah.
managed to get every part wrong. They didn't get one thing right, and that's what makes it a masterpiece. But yeah, you could just feel like too many ideas. Just like too many new ideas coming in too fast. You could feel the influence of wrestlers like not wanting to lose clean. Like it's just like everything. So yeah, I mean, I was fascinated watching it, but I wouldn't call. Yeah, was I entertained? I don't know if I call it entertained. I was fascinated.
So
You
you
know,
did not like the storyline where Goldberg was not going to follow the script. You did not like that storyline.
all that stuff about the script. Oh man. I mean, it's just like you only can break reality so much, right? Like you start like so then everyone else is on script. like like it's just yeah,
Yeah, I never
like
liked that. Never
uh
liked that. No.
you know, there's something that happens out here in comedy too. Like sometimes like I told you, I have the show Stand Up and Clown, and I have a very simple format. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's like a really good clown who's seen thousands of hours of clown stuff. And they were like, "Oh, you need to do this and you should do that. And you need to really subvert what it is." And I'm like, "No." I was like, that's for people like us who've seen too much. A regular fan wants something much simpler, much
Right.
more basic, much more easy to follow. Like you're writing the show for a 0.5% of its audience. And that's what Vince Russo is. Vince Russo is writing a show for this like person who has consumed so much wrestling that you almost have to break the rules of physics to give them even a slight jolt of excitement. Like you have to be like, we're going to talk about the backstage stuff. It's like, that's not fans. Fans just want a good story. That's it. We see it. We're seeing it right now. Just simple stories. Everything that's working is simple.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like the Sammy storyline. It's not that crazy. It's not that complex. It's that
No.
pretty easy to follow, and like quote unquote casual fans eat it up because the ratings have been going up, obviously. But I mean, they eat it up too. So I think it's just easy, simple, great storytelling. It's like Hogan Savage in '89, from
Yeah.
'88 to
So
'89.
simple.
Like so simple, but so effective, and everyone always goes, "Oh, it's the best storytelling." Very simple, very effective.
I have to jet out of here, but like not to tie it back to the clown stuff, but one of the things when I teach is I do this exercise where I have people come out and I say, "Hey, show us your best idea to be successful or your worst idea to be like for this audience to really love you and like applaud you and laugh." And it's silent, right? And I'm like, and I always say, "Hey, but whatever it is, give your all. Like if it's your worst idea, really do it the best you can. If it's your best idea, do the best version of your best idea." And people come out and they do these things and like they get these great laughs. And then I'll go around and I'll ask the class, like, was that their best idea or their worst idea? It's very rare that people think the best idea is the best idea and the worst idea is the worst idea. Like you shouldn't put so much value in the complexity of ideas. Put value in the execution of ideas. Like you're talking about the bloodline or maybe talk about MJF Punk or like things we've really liked in the recent times.
Yep.
This is the young lion wanting to take down the veteran. Such a simple idea. The execution's amazing. You know, Sammy wants to have a family. Sammy wants to belong. And this group takes advantage of it. Simple story. The execution's amazing. Like, that's a thing that, like, I think a lot of more writer centric bookers, they think their ideas are what matters. And in fact, ideas are worthless. Like, any idea, if it's simple and clean, can work. You know, with the WGA, let's just say you came up with, if you were like, oh, I had an idea for, it's a spaceship and there's an alien on it and it's trying to kill everyone. And like someone has to save the day. And then Alien came out. And you were like, hey, I came up with that idea. They would say, yeah, but it's all in how you execute it. Like, you wouldn't be
Right.
able to sue them. If you had a script that they copied, if they copied the methodology with or the narrative that you had created, now you have a lawsuit. But just having an idea is worthless. And, you know, in wrestling, you see people who suffer from the affliction of loving their ideas too much. And if you love ideas too much, then you want them to be like complex and interesting and have enormous twists too early, you know, because it's fun to talk about that shit. But in fact, it's like the opposite works. Simple ideas told with like grace and enthusiasm and like by experts. That's what works.
Well said. Yes, I think that's a great stopping point. That's well said. Where can everybody find you? Where can everybody get you, social media wise?
Social media, I'm at Jetso Time on Twitter. That's probably the one I use the least. I'm the Chad Damiani on Instagram. You could see a bunch of this weird shit I'm doing now, and most likely I'll lose all my credibility with just like paging through one page of pictures. So I suggest you do it. Also, I have a podcast myself that's called Stand Up and Clown, same name as the show. And honestly, it won't be for all your fans, JP. Like, but if you're interested in like, I do talk quite a bit about the psychology of what I do now, and it definitely does cross over with wrestling. But it's mostly like performers I respect, and us talking about how we create work. And if you're in LA, come to a show. We're always doing something dumb.
Awesome. Well, Chad, Damian, thank you so much for coming on and spending the time. We got to have you back. You can tell some awesome stories about WCW. Great
Well,
stuff.
it was a pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.